Hello, I'm Liz Duplessis, the Instructional Designer in Distance Education at Santa Rosa Junior College. In part 1 of our 3-part video series, Teaching Through Discussion Forums, SRJC faculty Jessica Harris shares her icebreaker activity in Canvas and explains how it builds community and sets the tone and expectations for her online class, Introduction to Information Literacy. First, she reflects on the pedagogical differences between facilitating online and classroom discussions. Then she walks us through her icebreaker instructions in Canvas. She also shows how she plays the roles of facilitator and coach to provide direction and to acknowledge and make connections among student contributions. Here's Jessica.
In the past, I taught these courses completely face-to-face. I really love the interaction that you have with students and that students have with one another in the classroom, that whole classroom dynamic, right? And building kind of that knowledge together. Right? And so then the opportunity came to teach online. And I know that when we think of online courses, a lot of times, unfortunately, they have the reputation of being inferior to face-to-face classes. And so I see this as kind of a problem to solve. Right? There's a way to do this, but perhaps the approach just might be different than what we do face-to-face. And sure enough, the pedagogy does differ from one to the other, and there really is an effective way to do this. And so the way I like to approach this is a scaffolding of discussion boards, right? Because just like the face-to-face classroom, really the heart of an online class for me is in the discussion boards, right? And the interaction that's taking place there, because I think we all agree, right, that cognitive development really happens when you have a number of high-quality interactions. Okay, so let's take a look here. And so this is my LRI-10 class. So how do we create these high quality interactions online? Because that's what we're really looking for, right? So we want to think about, well, how can we achieve that? Because it's not that students don't want to have a conversation online. We're thinking, oh, they just replied and said, yeah, sure, I agree with that. That sounds really good. Blah, 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 right? And so this is just really mediocre reaction, where maybe it's just more, you know, when we're in person, we naturally know how to have a conversation and say, oh, yeah, I really agree with, you know, what you're saying there, but this is really what I'm thinking. But online, it's not, you know, when a student has to sit there and write, that's a whole different process. And how does that translate? And we know that everyone, right, might hit a wall with a certain thing. And it might be for a student, okay, so I can talk to you about this in person, but now you want me to sit down and write this. Okay. What do I do? You know, so let's think about all of those things and how we weave those in, right? So the first thing that I want to look at here is the icebreaker, okay? And so this is pretty classic, right, to make some introductions. And so let's introduce ourselves, right? And so the first thing I'm saying here is we all come to this class at different points in our lives and academic careers. And that's a really important thing to think about, particularly in a community college. We have a really diverse population. Why not take advantage of it, right? Because, you know, when we think about, you know, we want to have all of these different voices come in. Students in an icebreaker typically want to identify with others who are similar to themselves, right? And here, so what we want to try and do is create an environment where we're asking students to reply to someone who's different than themselves, right? So in this icebreaker, what I'm doing is I'm asking students to share a website that you use for information. Let's keep it G-rated, right? Because we want to make it a little playful. This is an icebreaker, right? It should be low challenge, high support, right? And so, but we also want it to align and support the course content, right? So you want to keep everything aligned with those SLOs because we're trying to build the interaction here, right? And so they can share a website that they find useful for information. Do you find searching for information online to be useful? Right? So what's your experience? Because we're trying to bring in everyone's different experiences. And so the reply to someone who experiences researching differently than yourself. And so really, I find that my job as an instructor at this point is to be more of a coach, right? So I'm going to post the initial model post about what I'm thinking about so students can see that. But then as a coach, I'm going to try and direct students a little bit, because the natural inclination is that they're going to try and respond to someone and say, oh yeah, I really like that website too, or oh yeah, I love searching online, it's really great. Where what we're really looking for is for students to ask each other, ask a question, provide support, acknowledge a different perspective, right? And this is a very streamlined, you want to give very specific direction, all right? Thinking about that RP group, students who feel directed, connected, valued, okay? And so what we're thinking about here too is bringing in different voices. The more voices that we have, the more chances, right, we have for kind of this high quality cognitive development, because ideas start to converge, they start to diverge, right? The more voices that we have. So you really want to encourage that connection. I find that students are very chatty with this, because you've provided something that's relevant. They get to choose what they're going to share for this website. So they're quite forthcoming. So you can see here, I'm talking about the New York Times as a news website, but also living the sweet life in Paris, something personal, but also talking about why I think, that might be credible. And so immediately we have students posting about a website like Bing, and how they love the variety of pictures. And so you start to, I start to really get this sense of, it's almost like a pre-assessment. What do students know about researching? What do they not know about it, right? And so this is, I love the graphics, the appeal, right? And so this is a chance for me to actually give a little preview of what this course is going to be about by responding and saying, yeah, I acknowledge, right? I value your perspective as a student, because we're all learners. I use Google myself, more out of habit, right though? Do you find the answers are accurate, right? So I'm starting to direct and give them a sense of what this course is going to be about. So again, aligning the icebreaker with the course content, right? We're going in a particular direction.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yes. Lovely. Yes. Lovely.
Okay. So the other thing I'd like to mention about having students in the icebreaker start to respond to others that have different views than themselves or different interests is that immediately setting the stage and setting the tone for the course, that will be the expectation.
For resources that inform Jessica's teaching strategies, see her reading list at this URL. Thanks for watching.